90.3 WHPC now presents Law You Should Know. The law affects every aspect of our lives, our home, our jobs, and our recreational activities. Now, learn about the law and how to protect yourself against the loss of your liberty or property, and learn how to stand up for your rights and seek compensation when you have been wronged. Your host for Law You Should Know is attorney Kenneth J. Landau, a past dean of the Nassau Academy of Law, and frequently lectures to lawyers on ethics and avoiding problems with clients, and to the public on how to choose and use lawyers. This is Law You Should Know on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hi, this is Ken Landau, and welcome to Law You Should Know. Today we'll be talking about hearing and the law, and in hearing in terms of ears. And our guest is Dr. Mark J. Syms, MD, who is a
neurotologist.
Thank you. And who's an expert on hearing and nerves and all the related symptoms. And that's why he's going to talk to us about hearing and the law. Dr. Syms, welcome to Law You Should Know.
Thanks, Ken.
How big a problem is hearing and deterioration of hearing in our modern society?
Oh, it's a lot. In the United States, there are about 40 million people who have a treatable hearing loss. And of them, less than 20% have treated it. If getting to a little bit of a younger age group, about 1 in 5 people in their early 20s has a measurable hearing loss already. So it's a lot.
And is that because of things that they're doing that generations before them did not do?
Yeah, it's predominantly, immediate exposure to sound using, wireless headphones or headsets. Yes.
And is it the volume of the sound also, or just the fact of the headphone?
It's a little bit of both. It's the volume plus the persistent intensity. So if people are going to do anything to try to, there's a couple things. One, you should probably listen to them around 60% of their maximum volume. That would be one piece of advice. And the second is take 5 minutes off every 60 minutes. Those two things would be really good. And if your ears are ringing afterwards, which is kind of the ear aching, you probably overdid it.
As more of our population becomes eligible for Medicare, is Medicare available to help evaluate and treat hearing loss?
Yes, and a little bit of a caveat of no. So when Medicare was adopted in 1965, hearing aids were sold door to door by the same people who sold Encyclopedia Britannica, Rapogo globes, and Fuller brushes, if people remember those names. And so at the time of the drafting of the law actually says Medicare shall not pay for hearing aids. So currently there's a statutory prohibition of that. There is actually a push right now to expand Medicare to that. We'll see where that goes. The other issue is a lot of the Medicare supplementals have what we would call hearing aid benefits, not hearing aid coverage. So they will give you a certain amount of money towards hearing aids, but they don't totally cover the devices.
And aside from the device itself, there's a process of evaluation, a medical evaluation, a hearing evaluation before you get to that point. So does Medicare pay for that medical evaluation?
They do. They'll pay for hearing tests and things like that. Yeah, I think you're hitting a very important point. And what I tell people is don't get hearing aids, get your hearing loss treated, because it's really, the professional and the professional care that really determines how well you do. So you're right on about that.
And what do you mean by that, by getting it treated?
Well, so, you need to get your hearing loss appropriately treated. First off, it needs to be appropriately evaluated. But then, getting hearing aids is getting physical objects put in your ear. Getting your hearing loss well treated, you've got to get the appropriately selected hearing aids that meet your need. They need to be physically fitted correctly. The prescription inside of them needs to be for your best hearing, not the generic one that the company's computers generate. There's validation of your hearing, so measuring and showing that the hearing aids validate it, and aftercare to make sure. So I give the example of high blood pressure. If you had high blood pressure, Ken, and I treated it and I never measured your blood pressure afterwards, you'd think I'm kind of a quack, right? And so there are a lot of people who get hearing aids but never get hearing care, which is a continuum monitoring. In fact, here's the sad statistic. 20% of people who have hearing loss get it treated of them, only a third of their hearing aids are appropriately fitted, programmed, and adjusted to treat their hearing loss appropriately, which means about 8% of people with hearing loss have well-treated hearing loss out there. So it's pretty poorly treated.
And is there something you can do to try to slow down or minimize your hearing loss as you get exposed to the world or get older?
Some of it, obviously avoid loud noises when you're going to be in noisy environments, wear hearing protection. The second thing is honestly, a large part of it's genetic. 80% of 80-year-olds will have a hearing loss of aging. And so you're not going to be able to avoid it to some extent. As the saying goes, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And so, it is there's a genetic element to it. And because of that, no, some of you can avoid. The real issue is if you have it, knowing you have it, right? So, if you feel good, it doesn't mean you don't have high blood pressure. And if you think you communicate well, it doesn't mean you don't have hearing loss. The only way to know if you do or don't have hearing loss is to have it measured appropriately by a professional.
And what would be some warning signs just that you have it?
Yeah, well, the one that's measurable is people turn up the TV. The second is people say what or huh. Probably the third most predictive is your loved one and families tell you have a hearing loss. And I always say to patients, they go, well, my family's bugging me, but I don't have a hearing loss. I said, well, why are they going to do that? They're not just going to, proverbially bust your chops. If you have a hearing loss, you have a hearing loss. They're telling you the truth. So it's really listening to the feedback of others.
Is there a difference between hearing loss and listening skills?
The funny joke is I do have a relative whose wife sent them to get their hearing tested because they said they couldn't hear and their hearing was totally normal. And so the whole point was there's a difference between hearing and listening, right? Hearing is the detection of sound by your ears. And then so what I would say is communication is actually having an effective interaction between you and somebody else or multiple people.
And is turning up the volume a solution, or it really just masks the problem?
No, it doesn't. It's two things. One is it tries to mask the problem, but the other thing is most hearing loss is high toned, right? And so when you turn up the volume on your television, for instance, you turn up the treble and the bass. The treble's the high pitch, the bass is the low pitch. So you're turning them both up. So you're actually not compensating for where you need to do it. So what'll happen is at some point, the bass will become so uncomfortable that you no longer try to get or are able to correct the high tone. So no, the point is you need something that is custom fit to your hearing loss. So the reason that hearing aids work, if they're appropriately used, is I kind of use it as the example, the difference between trying to buy a suit right off the rack or going and get a suit that's custom fit and tailored. And most people would get their suit adjusted so it fits them correctly.
Is there something people can do to prevent it or delay the onset of it?
Sure. It's all those things that we all, exercise, eat right. There's a thought that, there's a vascular component to hearing loss where you don't have good blood supply. So keep your blood supply healthy, all of those things. Those are the things. Keep the body healthy and the ears will remain as healthy as possible and avoid stresses.
Are there things that people can or should do to block out loud noises? Let's say riding the subway or walking past someone drilling in the street?
I think if you're going to be around immediate noise of that nature, it's not like you're going to stop, put in earplugs and stuff like that. Good old, thumb on the ear works, on both sides. So that's one of the things. I'm not sure that I would say the subway is that loud continuously. One of the things that's really cool now is you can get a sound meter application in your smartphone and you can start to see what's out there. You really don't want to be exposed to noises much more than about 85 decibel.
And is it 85 decibels of 2-second duration harmful, or it has to?
It's usually have a long, right. So lower volume, longer duration, louder volume, shorter duration, right? So you're correct. 85 is for a longer period of time. Obviously, a gunshot that goes up to 150 decibel is instantaneous, but can often be. I see, unfortunately, a large number of people have had hearing loss from gunfire exposure. So it is. You are right. It's not just the sound volume. It's the length. So higher the volume, shorter the time.
And what about cumulative exposure? If you work in Manhattan, you pass through a noisy environment.
Most of that stuff is not to the point where it's going to cause that type of hearing loss. Most of it, I think it's usually people who are in loud occupation, construction workers, jackhammer operators and things like that. And you will see that Many people on work sites have gotten more conscientious about it, but not all of them. I mean, it's amazing how many times I drive by the road crew that's jackhammering the road, and it's the young guy with no hearing protection who's and he's the one who's doing it all. So,
and if someone's in their work environment, let's say they're working in their law office, is there, in terms of sound, can they work while they have some sound on? Does that help them focus better, or is it distracting or harmful?
For some people it is, and for some people it isn't. I mean, I do think the environment matters, and so, I mean, I'll just tell you, I'm not a good function in background noise, so I don't write or read or do computational things with background noise. I had a roommate in college who would write all of his papers watching TV, so different people can do it differently. What I will say is if you want to communicate better from a hearing point of view, more background noise is a problem, and acoustically unfavorable environments are a problem. So if you want to know what are acoustically unfavorable environments, go to restaurants, because restaurants are designed to be loud because they want you to not have conversation, eat, and leave. So things like cement, marble, glass, concrete, were things that bounce sound around. So carpet and drapes and upholstery are the types of things that dampen the sound.
So in a restaurant, they have the music on to make it unpleasant for you. So
not unpleasant, pleasant, you think, but difficult to have conversation. So you spend more time eating than you do having conversation. They don't make money off of conversation. They make money off of you eating food. So if you walk into some of the major chains like Cheesecake Factory, it's in the middle of the day when it's nearly empty, it's loud. And that's because, believe it or not, they're piping in sound.
Okay. I'd like to remind our listeners, we're talking about hearing and the law. Hearing loss, how it may be medically covered, how it might result from an accident or just aging, and what can be done to prevent it or deal with it. Our guest is Dr. Mark J. Syms, and he's a neurotologist and is involved in helping people evaluate. He's also the author of Listen Up. What are some of the topics that you cover in your book, Listen Up, Doctor?
Yeah, so thanks. Listen Up is an evolution of all the conversations I have with my patients. So basically explaining to them why hearing loss matters, why hearing loss is oftentimes not treated well, and how to treat it well. And so it's really, I would say these things to my patients over and over again, which is my pleasure and fun. But I thought maybe if I write this down in the book, I could have more impact on people who are outside of the ability to come to my office.
And let's switch to the legal arena for a moment. If
Sure.
a lawyer's interviewing a client or a witness, or maybe at a meeting, how can they make sure they can hear and really understand what the other person is saying to them?
Well, I think positioning is very important, right? And so you want to get closer to people. You want to minimize background noise. So I was talking about and being an acoustically friendly environment. And so the other thing I talk about is communication versus hearing, right? So hearing is detection with your ears. Communication is that plus what we call speech reading, seeing people's face, mouth, and lips, because you can tell the difference between wife and wipe. And frankly, that's something that we developed before we learned how to speak. Like our parents hold us in their hands and they look down to us and they say things and we understand those things. And then the third is context. Once you know what people are talking about, you can fill in the blank. So you want to maximize all of those things. I think when people are interacting, especially in the legal purvey, they might want to get people to acknowledge that they understand what they're saying, mirror back what's being said, especially if you do have a concern about hearing loss.
So they should reiterate what they understood from the client to make sure they understand it, and maybe
Correct.
Make sure the client is understanding what they're saying.
Yes. And so if it gets so severe, and you'll usually know that because they will bring a family member or they'll say what or huh. I mean, there is a point where you can resort to, real-time transcription with an application. A lot of the products now, even all of the desktop computers with their operating systems or smart devices all have real-time translation. Because I think it's really, even if there are errors, it enables them to continue to follow the conversation, especially, as you know, with lawyers, when you're going to visit your attorney. I mean, oftentimes these are, foreign concepts with nuances that really matter in terms of what your client does or doesn't want or will or won't get or what will or won't happen. Sometimes
it becomes important in legal issues. In workers' comp, or there are accidents that can actually cause damage to a person's hearing, let's say exposure to those jackhammering sounds all the time, or working in a factory, or some kind of trauma to the ear or the head?
The most common one is airbag deployment in a car with the windows up. So, the way an airbag it fills up is there's literally an explosion. And so if the windows are up, if we would all admit to it, when we were maybe a little younger and not quite as smart, people would throw firecrackers in trash cans, right? And it would be incredibly loud because all of the sound would be focused. Well, that's kind of what it's like having a airbag deploy in a car. And so a lot of people will get injuries there in car accidents. It's probably the most common thing that's seen from a medical legal point of view.
And is it a good idea to keep the window open a little bit? Does that mitigate that?
I think it's to your comfort. I mean, I don't mean to be a wise guy, but the real answer is stay out of accidents, right?
Yes.
I'm not sure, people have to be a cognizant. One of the problems is when you put the window down, the road noise gets extremely loud. Right. And now people are trying to maybe listen to your podcast, right? And so they want to hear that more than they want to hear the road noise. So a lot of cars are not very quiet. So people will oftentimes leave the windows up, especially when they want to hear something.
Okay. And what advice do you have for parents, or let's say lawyers are dealing with colleagues with hearing loss, or they suspect there may be hearing loss? What should there be some kind of intervention? Maybe they should have their hearing evaluated. This is not just a social issue, right? This is not just, people getting annoyed and things like that. Obviously, in the legal context, it's important that you communicate effectively. I think that's probably why a lot of your stuff is written down. But there is a medical component to hearing loss. If people have untreated hearing loss, it's highly associated with memory problems and dementia. So there is reasons and compulsions for people to do it. It's really, how do you get them to take that step? And I think, it's got to be through influence and explaining to people. I think one of the big difference in mindset is I have reading glasses, and the reason I have reading glasses is because I can't see the letters. But the reason you go and get your hearing loss treated is because other people can't communicate with you. So the difference is you get your hearing checked for everyone else. You get your reading glasses for yourself. And so you have to kind of have that mindset that you're doing it for others. And when you're in a service industry like the legal profession, you are there to serve others. So you need to make sure that you're as maximized as possible. And you want your ears to understand what people are saying.
Right. Well, you're in the communication business, right?
And speaking of communications, do you have any tips for lawyers as they're trying to be heard and understood in the courtroom?
Well,
by
obviously,
jury or by the judge?
Well, I think there are a couple things. One is the judge is in control, and so they don't like to repeat themselves. So if you find yourself having the judge repeat themselves, you better go get your hearing loss treated, because judges, based on just the whole position. In terms of the jury, you want to engage people. You want to make sure that they're giving you eye contact. I assume, I'm not sure, I'm not an attorney, but I assume you can get people positioned better. I have patients who ask for, or used to in my career, ask for excuses from jury duty. I just describe their hearing loss, because many courts will accommodate their hearing loss. So they don't want me to really determine the ability to serve. They just want me to describe their needs in the courtroom. So I think courts are getting more and more willing to take people who are hearing impaired into juries as well. And so, you definitely need to be able to communicate with them. And so those are the other things that people use in the courtroom, visual guides, those types of things, to be able to communicate the idea in other ways.
And does it help to have visual aids to go beyond a juror's ability to hear or a judge's ability to hear, so they can use their eyes and all these different dynamics together?
Yeah. And so when I have a patient who's hearing impaired, I will say to their family, before you start speaking, get in front of them and get their attention. And so it's the same, right? And face them directly. So if you want the jury to hear you, and we see that, I've seen it at the times that I've been testifying as an expert. The attorneys will by and large go right up to the jury box, and they'll talk to them kind of directly so they can get as best communication as possible.
And you also want your words not only to be heard, but understood and appreciated.
Right.
So how can attorneys best do that, to carry beyond hearing it, to be understood and felt and have an impact?
Well, I think you should speak at a reasonable cadence with a reasonable amount of clarity. You probably don't want to over enunciate, but you want to enunciate clearly and slowly. And frankly, it's just like anything. Repeat the thing that really you want people to be the take-home message, right? You want to say that multiple times to make sure that they get it. And look for, there's a lot of nonverbal communication. I mean, you and I are having it right now where people acknowledge and look at each other and stuff like that. So you're looking for all of those cues to make sure that people are getting what you're saying.
And going back to the lawyer interviewing a client or a witness in their office, that nonverbal communication is important.
Yes, it's especially you can pretty much tell by people's position and posture whether or not they really are or not getting you, or whether or not, they start looking off or their mind is wandering. What I would say is people with hearing impairment, I liken it to running with two 10-pound weights around your ankles. It's a lot of work. And so you shouldn't expect them to go do a 5-mile run. If you take most of your clients proverbially on a 5-mile run, you might want to take that hearing loss patient on a 2-mile run. In other words, don't expect to cover as much and try to do it in smaller increments because people do fatigue.
And you don't know if the jury is paying attention or has some disability in hearing you. So you want to do the things you said, keep it short and simple, repetition, dramatic pauses, and use visual aids when appropriate.
Yeah, and you certainly, obviously, if they have hearing technology like hearing aids that you can see, it. But, you should presume the older your juror gets, the more likely they are to have hearing loss.
And what about hearing loss in driving? Does that impair a person's ability to drive? No,
people who are profoundly deaf can drive. That's one of the reasons that fire trucks have lights and sirens. But obviously, there is maybe, you're not using that data to be aware of what's going on around you. You use visual cues more than you use ear cues.
And what are the thoughts do you have as far as hearing and the law?
I think that probably one of the big areas about hearing in the law, or where it feeds in, is that thing I was touching on in dementia, right? And so where this really becomes an issue is in the latter part of life when you're talking about people's competency. I think that there are a decent number of patients I've seen who were considered incompetent or no longer able to remain independent, who had untreated hearing loss or poorly treated hearing loss. And then amazingly, once they got it treated, they became much more competent and much more independent. And as you know, there's oftentimes in the latter part of life, people have more complex financial affairs. They have more complex social interactions because there are now oftentimes their children are involved in their day-to-day care. So it really can have an effect in that respect from a legal point of view. So I actually would think if I were in elder law, I'd get if they hadn't, I'd want most of my patients, I'd suggest maybe they get their hearing checked and
just to rule that out.
Yes.
And on the other end of the spectrum, if a child is having problems in school and it may not be of an intellectual nature, could the child have some diagnosed hearing problem?
Yeah. So probably the only difference is they screen at schools. So, the schools are aware and they do screening. It's at a more rapid cadence when kids are younger, and then it's done at a several year cadence in the latter part of their education. But hearing screening is done on a regular basis in school. Doctor,
just give us your website again, or how your book can be obtained.
Sure. You can get the book at www.listenuphearing.com, and you can purchase it there. You can get it through Amazon as well, but it's actually less expensive to purchase the book on the website, www.listenuphearing.com.
And we talked before about decibels, and maybe you can just take us through those measurements again. What a low sound may be, a moderate sound versus a dangerous sound.
So, there's one thing about the decibel scale that I think people sometimes underappreciate. It is a logarithmic scale. So it is similar to the Richter scale for earthquakes. And so a 3 decibel change is a doubling in intensity. So normal conversation is between around 50 decibel. A lawnmower is around 70 decibel. a jet engine is about 110 to 120 decibels. So these are kind of the things. And then the other issue becomes obviously the frequency of the sound. So the reason people have problems understanding people is it's what they'll say is, I know people are talking to me, but I can't understand what they're saying because they have a high tone hearing loss with better hearing in the low tones. Vowels are low tones. Consonants are high tones. So they can't hear the consonants, which are the parts of words that give them meaning. So what I always say is it's like continually playing Wheel of Fortune. In Wheel of Fortune, you can buy as many vowels as you want because the vowels don't solve the puzzle. The consonants solve the puzzle. And that's exactly what you don't hear. And that's why people are always guessing. And this feeds into the whole concept of dementia. If you're doing all that work all the time to communicate, your brain's overburdened. And that's what leads to the dementia.
And that can be cured by evaluating the hearing.
Well, treating the hearing correctly lowers your risk, certainly. There's actually studies going on right now to determine whether or not if you have some mild dementia, we treat your hearing, does it reverse it? But there was a article in Lancet, which is like the British version of the New England Journal of Medicine, 2 years back that said the most important thing you can do to decrease your risk of dementia is treat your hearing loss. Not quit smoking, not lose weight, not low exercise, not lower your cholesterol. By far, the most important thing you can do is treat your hearing loss.
And hearing loss is about connection. And
it is independent
and appreciating that connection. And right. Even if your mind's working fine, your vision's working fine, if you lose that dynamic, it's going to affect your quality of life.
Sure. I mean, you don't connect, you don't have conversations. And what I tell people, hearing loss is like baseball, but worse. So what do I mean by that? In baseball, 3 strikes, hearing loss 2. Here's what I'll give you an example. You say something, I say, what? You say it again, I say, huh? And then you say, forget it. 2 times. You miss it 2 times and you're out. People don't want to do it. And what happens is you slowly get disconnected from people.
Now, if you're the other person, should you be more patient? Should you try to position yourself differently?
Sure.
Should you write a note?
No, you should get in front of them, get their attention before start speaking. And then the second thing is if they don't understand it the first time, don't say it the same way louder. So the example I give to people is you say, oh, it's time for dinner. They go, what? You say, we're going to have supper now. Once you say the same thing with a different way, they can put the 2 together to get the meaning rather than you saying what they didn't understand the first time.
And this could be important for lawyers too, in interviewing clients to reframe the statement or reframe the question.
Correct.
And lastly, what about the value of quiet? You mentioned you yourself like a quiet environment. So some people like some background noise.
Yeah.
Some people like quiet.
Yeah, I think there is and it's harder to find. That's part of it. I think there are people, meditation and if you're spiritual or quiet time to kind of do deep thinking, I think that has a lot of value. Personally, I enjoy getting up in the morning and having what I might call some Renaissance time, which is some time by myself to kind of think things through. So I think there's a lot of value. Oftentimes when I'm trying to solve a problem, I will drive to work without anything on. So the car is another place, but there is incredible value to quiet.
And I just want to say, another pun intended, there is a certain value to quiet, but there's no value in hearing loss.
Correct. Fair enough. I like that one.
I would like to thank Mark J. Syms, and he mentioned his book. If you missed any portion of this program, you can listen to the podcast at nccradio.org, or welcome to tell someone else about the program. This most interesting program on hearing and the law and preventing hearing loss. You've been listening to Law You Should Know here on 90.3 WHPC, the voice of Nassau College in Garden City, Long Island, New York. Please join us next week at this same time for another program on Law You Should Know.